Hello again. Welcome back. This is module 14. And in this module, we're going to talk about OSHA regulations that pertaining to fire and emergency response and egress, that type of thing. And so it's called subpart L, and it's 1910.155 to 1910.165. And then we're going to go through those, and then we're going to talk about the other ones in another video. This one's going to be probably a little bit long. So let's get started. There we go. There's the blazing hot first slide. Your hands are cold. Just hold them up there to that slide and they'll get warm. Subpart L, fire protection, 1910.155.165, just like I promised. This subpart contains requirements for fire brigades, all portable and fixed fire suppression equipment, fire detection systems, and fire or employee alarm systems. This subpart applies to all employments except maritime, construction, and agriculture. And we know what that means. When OSHA says this thing applies to everybody but except that, it almost always means that's because they have their own rules. They have their own things. So, and that's what they are. Right? What 5 is called is the scope, the application of this thing, and a whole bunch of definitions. 156 is fire brigades. 157, portable fire extinguishers. 158 is small hoses. 159, automatic sprinkler systems. 160, fixed extinguishing systems, but no sprinkler systems. 161, fixed extinguishing systems using dry chemical. 162, fixed extinguishing systems using a gas. 163, fixed extinguishing system using water or foam. And 164, automatic fire detection systems. And then 165, we're going to cover that in the next slide because that's going to kind of tie in with 1910.38 and 39. So some of these ones, especially the higher numbers here, are pretty specify one thing, and we're not going to go into a lot of detail on those. They're not that long anyhow, but still, let's get started on this. So here's one of the definitions. Equipment is listed if it is of a kind mentioned in a list, which is published by a national recognized testing laboratory, which makes periodic inspections of the production of such equipment, and which states that such equipment meets nationally recognized standards or has been tested and found safe for use in a specified manner. I think we've seen that definition somewhere before, something awfully like it. And of course, there's the UL mark, Underwriters Laboratories. If you're going to buy anything, especially electric, it should have the UL label on it. That shows that they have tested it. Carbon dioxide, that means a colorless, odorless, electrically non-conductive inert gas, chemical formula CO2. That is a medium for extinguishing fires by reducing the concentration of oxygen or fuel vapor in the air to the point where combustion is possible. Class A fire means a fire involving ordinary combustible materials such as paper, wood, cloth, and some rubber or plastic materials. Class B fire means a fire involving flammable or combustible liquids, flammable gases, greases, and similar materials, and some rubber or plastic materials. Now, you're going to hear this same stuff in a lot of different things, even in my class A, what these fires are. And that's okay if you hear more than once, because I don't think none of us can remember everything we hear just one time. So A is wood and paper, that type of thing. B is flammable or combustible liquids. C means a fire involving energized electrical equipment where safety to the employee requires the use of electrically non-conductive extinguishing media. That means it's energized. Now, once you pull the plug on it and it's not energized anymore, then it's no longer Class C fire. It's going to go back to a more likely an A. Class D fire means a fire involving combustible metals such as magnesium, titanium, zirconium, sodium, lithium, and potassium. I've never worked around combustible metals, but it sounds kind of scary a little bit. Dry powder means a compound used to extinguish or control Class D fires. And Class K fires, they're not mentioned in the OSHA regulations because they're kind of new. And they're for kitchen grease fires. And they named it K, and that makes a lot of sense because you remember that one's for kitchen. And you don't want to use the ABC dry chemicals. And in a kitchen fire, you want to avoid splashing, and you would never want to pick up a burning pan of grease. So let's get into definitions of subpart L. Fire brigade, private fire department, industrial fire department. You're one of those. Means an organized group of employees who are knowledgeable, trained, and skilled in at least basic firefighting operations. Incipient stage fire, and that's a very common usage in talking about fire. Incipient stage means a fire which is in the initial or beginning stage and which can be controlled or extinguished by portable fire extinguishers, class 2 standpipe or small hose systems without the need for protective clothing or breathing apparatus. So what they're saying here, it's a small fire, just incipient means early stages, and can be put out by a small hose system or a fire extinguisher, and maybe 2 fire extinguishers, but generally speaking, no more than that. And you don't need to have protective clothing or breathing apparatus. If it's that bad, it needed to be getting out of there. Pre-discharge employee alarm means an alarm which will sound at a set time prior to actual discharge of an extinguishing system so that employees may evacuate the discharge area prior to system discharge. In other words, that's a system that's going to discharge a whole bunch of stuff coming down to distinguish a fire in this area, and they give you a little bit of time to get out of there first. So they have a pre-discharge employee alarm, so the employee gets out of there. 1910.156 is fire brigades. It looks like they're got a leaf coming out of their fire hose, doesn't it? But all right, fire brigades. This section contains requirements for the organization, training, and personal protective equipment of fire brigades whenever they are established by the employer. The requirements of this section apply to fire brigades, industrial fire departments, and private or contractual type fire departments. Personal protective equipment requirements apply only to members of fire brigades performing interior structural firefighting. The requirements of this section do not apply to airport crash rescue or forest firefighting operations. All right, so what they're saying here, the PPE part of this section here don't apply, and that's not, it'll be like other one numbers, I think, don't apply if the fire brigade is performing interior, if they apply only, to members of fire brigades performing interior structural firefighting. So they're differentiating here between an incipient stage fires or small fires or a structure fire where the structure is actually burning now. And that's a big difference in firefighting. Those fires with just a chair's burning or something like that, or a wastebasket, that's one thing. But when the building starts to burn, that's a structural fire, and it's a whole new ballgame. And also, they're saying airport crash rescue and forest firefighting operations are exempt too. And again, that's because they have their own rules. Organizational statement. If you're going to have a fire brigade, the employer shall prepare and maintain a statement or written policy about your fire brigade, which establishes the existence of a fire brigade. Now, you don't have to have a fire brigade, but if you do, you have to do this. You have to have a written policy that says we're going to have a fire brigade. The basic organizational structure, the type, amount, and frequency of training to be provided to fire brigade members. This has to be laid out in your plan here. You got to have a organizational statement. So the type, amount, and frequency of training. So you got to put some thought into this to provide it to fire brigade members. You just can't say we're going to have a fire brigade and it's you, you, and you. The expected number of members in the fire brigade, that has to be in your statement too. And the functions that the fire brigade is to perform at the workplace. In other words, you may have some standpipe hoses, small hoses there. You may have fire extinguishers, whatever you want them to do. You have to spell it out in this organizational statement so everybody knows what's going on with this fire brigade. This is the fire brigade itself, having one or not is not required. Personnel ensure that employees doing interior structural firefighting are physically capable of performing duties during emergencies. So interior structural firefighting, not just a fire extinguisher, a small fires, but they have to be capable of performing duties. And I think we all know that firefighting is a very physically rigorous profession. Employees with known heart disease, epilepsy, or emphysema shall not participate in fire brigade emergency activities unless a physician's certificate of the employee's fitness is provided. So if somebody has one of these issues, and probably if you're in charge of the fire brigade, any physical issue, you might want to make sure that the physician certificate, you have that too. Now, if you're going to wear a mask, you have to have that too. So I could probably tie right in with this. The employer shall provide training and education for all fire brigade members commensurate with those duties and functions that fire brigade members are expected to perform. So in other words, you expect them just to put out incipient stage fires and the fire extinguisher training and maybe escape and emergency escape plans and stuff like that. Probably all you're going to need, but you have to spell that out. Firefighting equipment. Maintain and inspect at least annually the firefighting equipment to assure the safe operational condition of the equipment. At least annually, you got to inspect it. Portable fire extinguisher and respirators have to be inspected at least monthly. Now, what do they mean when portable fire extinguishers you're inspecting it? You're basically just a visual inspection over the monthly, looking at it, make sure the hose is there, the hose is not cracked. If it's a ABC, it'll have a gauge on it. It's got to be in the green, a little dial on the gauge. The others have to be the tank's not banged up or messed up and it's hung up right and things. So most of the time, this is monthly, it's just a visual. The annual, it goes a little bit more detailed, but the monthly, just a visual. And that's when you have a little tag on there and you put your date on there and initials. Ensure the protective clothing protects the head, body, and extremities and consists of at least the following components: foot and leg protection, hand protection, body protection, eye, face, and head protection. That's about covers it, doesn't it? Foot, leg, hand, body. One thing to leave out was kind of arms, but I think that's part of your hand protection. Paragraph E contains a lot of detail about protective clothing, and paragraph F covers respiratory protection. And we're not going to get into a lot of detail on those on that. That's the real fine points of it. So if you have a fire brigade and you're going to use it, then you need to go to this and look at it. 19.10.157 is called portable fire extinguishers. The scope of this standard is the placement, use, maintenance, and testing of portable fire extinguishers provided for the use of employees. Where the written fire safety policy requires the immediate and total evacuation of employees from the workplace upon the sounding of a fire alarm, and which includes an emergency action plan and the fire prevention plan, which meets the requirements of 29 CFR 1910.38 and 39 respectively, which we're going to talk about in the next video. And when fire extinguishers are not available in the workplace, the employer is exempt from all requirements of this section unless required otherwise in 1910. So in other words, it has to mean all three of those things. You have a written fire safety policy, and your policy states that all employees are going to get out. That's it. Everybody out. Nobody's going to stay to fight the fire. Nobody's going to stay to operate any equipment or shut down anything. Everybody is going to get out when the fire alarm is off. All right. And you have an emergency action plan and a fire prevention plan, and extinguishers are not available in the workplace. So do you have to have extinguishers in the workplace? No, if you do all of this. Okay. Now, your insurance company may have a little different idea about that, but in my opinion, it's a good idea to have fire extinguishers in the workplace and to have people trained on them. And you can designate that in your plan here to say, okay, the supervisors are going to do it. Then you got to train them. So, and if you're doing anything like welding or anything like that, you got to have fire extinguishers. So I'm guessing there's not too many businesses out there, unless they're really small businesses. Maybe you have 6 or 7 people and you don't want to mess with it. So you're going to just say, okay, when there's alarm, just everybody get out. And you can do that. Where the emergency action plan designates certain employees to be the only employees authorized to use the available portable fire extinguishers, and which requires all other employees in the fire area to immediately evacuate the affected work area upon the sounding of a fire alarm, the employer is exempt from the distribution requirements in paragraph D of this section, which we'll talk about those. Just that, though, just the D part. We're still on C. I ain't got the D yet. The employer shall provide portable fire extinguishers and shall mount, locate, and identify them so that they are readily accessible to employees without subjecting the employees to possible injury. And there's just a picture of a mounted extinguisher block with maintenance item. That would drive me up a wall a little bit when I'm making my rounds in the plant. So it doesn't tell you here how high that, and the other thing is about hanging them. It doesn't give you, there's height requirements, and I think they vary by state or maybe locality and of the top of the fire extinguisher, at least if we're in California. And generally speaking, you want to put them where you're not having to go into a fire to get the fire extinguisher. They're going to be basically on your way out, like near the door somewhere, so that you can get it. And if you can't get the fire out without, you still can get out. You never want to put. You always want to keep yourself between the exit and the fire so you can get out. And so you want the fire extinguisher there to be there too. Only approved portable fire extinguishers shall be used. How do you know they're approved? Are you an expert in that? You're probably not. But you probably, if you have them, you're going to have somebody come in every year and do a maintenance check on them. And there's stampings on all these things that look like hieroglyphics to me, but these people seem to know what they mean when they look at it. I guess you could figure it out if you look at it. And they'll be able to tell you when they're due for hydrostatic testing and all that stuff. And chances are, if you buy a fire extinguisher, it's going to be approved by somebody. They'll tell you by who, but the employer shall assure that portable fire extinguishers are maintained in a fully charged and operable condition and kept in their designated places at all time, except during use, of course. So this one here, look at the gauge on this. The gauge here is looks like it's 9 in the red. So it looks like that needs to be taken out of service. Looks like it's been used because there's the chains hanging down, pins out. So now this is D that they talked about before. Provide portable fire extinguishers provided for employee use. Selected and distributed based on the classes of anticipated workplace fires and on the size and degree of hazard affecting their use. Distribute portable fire extinguisher for use by employees on Class A fires so that the travel distance for employees to any extinguisher is 75 feet. Now, these are when you go around, if any decent sized company at OK Foods, we had the fire extinguisher guy come around once a month, and I usually went around with him. And it was interesting because he knew all this stuff about it because that's his job. And so you learn from people like that. And the travel distance is 75 feet. Now, that's not a straight line distance. That's the travel distance. That's in walking distance. So it's not a straight line. Distribute portable fire extinguishers for use by employees on Class B fires. What's B? It's liquids, flammable liquids. So that the travel distance from the Class B, B hazard area to any extinguisher is 50 feet. So that makes a little bit of sense. The employer shall distribute portable fire extinguishers used for Class C hazards on the basis of the appropriate pattern for the existing Class A or B hazards, because Class C involves what? Energized electrical equipment. But as soon as you pull the plug or turn it off, it's not Class C anymore. So you can see that what they're trying to do, make sure is they don't want them. They want to distribute it so you can get to them within 75 or 50 feet. Distribute Class D portable fire extinguishers so that the travel distance from the combustible metal working area to any extinguishing agent is 75 feet. Now, if you've been in one of the classrooms at Carl Albert, we were talking about hot work and 35-foot requirements, and that the classroom was just about 35 foot from the long sidewall to sidewall. In other words, the long distance of the classroom was almost, it was just maybe 38 feet, something like that. I forget. It was about 35 feet. So this is going to be a little bit more than twice that. So it's really not that far. So, and again, if your fire extinguisher people come out, they'll know that too. So. Portable fire extinguishers for Class D hazards are required in those combustible metal working areas where combustible metal powders, flakes, shavings, or similarly sized products are generated at least once every 2 weeks. So if you're doing any work on combustible metals and you're generating these particles, smaller, possibly combustible particles too, once every 2 weeks, then you need to have the fire extinguishers. I don't know why you wouldn't have them all the time if you had those types of metals, but that's the law here for the minimum. Portable fire extinguishers are required to receive an annual maintenance check. The employer shall record the annual maintenance date and retain this record for 1 year after the last entry. Again, that's usually done in that tag. You see they're pointing at the tag. The fire extinguisher company comes in and they do this annual maintenance on it. And in California, they actually had to discharge and refill them every year, which was a complete waste. No, I don't think anybody else does that. I belong to a Mason Lodge. We have 3 or 4 fire extinguishers in the building, and we have somebody come in every year and we don't do the monthly checks, but every year they come in and they check all the fire extinguishers and put new tags on them. And that's the kind of the record there basically is the new tag. And believe me, the fire department comes in and walks around your place. They're going to look at that. Portable extinguisher hose, this is E, inspection, maintenance, and testing. Portable extinguishers or hose shall be visually inspected monthly. Got a magnifying glass that big and look at them pretty close. The employer shall ensure that hydrostatic testing is performed by trained persons with suitable testing equipment and facilities. And my notes, there are plenty of reputable fire extinguisher companies who will know these regulations well. So this is, you need to know it has to be done, but if you have somebody that's worth a darn and they're doing this, your fire extinguisher annuals for you, they'll know all this stuff. Training and education. Where the employer has provided portable fire extinguishers for employee use in the workplace, the employer shall provide an educational program to familiarize employees with the general principles of fire extinguisher use and the hazards involved with incipient stage firefighting. So it's two-part here. When the employer has provided portable fire extinguishers for employee use in the workplace, they're going to provide an educational program to familiarize them with the general principles of fire extinguisher use, how to use the fire extinguishers, which ones to use, that type of thing, and the hazards involved with incipient stage firefighting. Now, in this general principles, you have to know your workstation. You figure out what kind of hazards you have. You're probably going to have, probably going to have some electrical. If you have computers or anything like that, you're going to have something that's going to be electrical, and they have to know that. So, and hazards involved with incipient stage firefighting. What do you do? What if the smoke it could be pretty bad from incipient stage? So you don't want to, make sure people they know not to inhale the smoke, even from a small fire. Employers shall provide the education required upon initial employment and at least annually thereafter. Now, this is initial employment because this is saying where everybody in the workplace. So that means everybody, any employees in the workplace. The employer shall provide employees who have been designated to use firefighting equipment as part of an emergency action plan with training and use of the appropriate equipment. Now, this is when you've designated certain people to do this, which is probably a good idea, unless you only have a few employees. Upon initial assignment to the designated group, and again, at least annually thereafter. So fire extinguisher training is annually after the initial. And then 158, this applies to small hose, class 2 and class 3 standpipe system, what size the hoses are and all the outputs and that type of thing. And we're not going to cover it here. In our buildings on bonded fiber products in California, we had the big hoses. I mean, the hose reel was 2.5 feet in diameter hanging about the plant. And we never used them. And the fire department told us don't. They're there really for the fire department to use, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can do more damage with them, because boy, when that water comes out of that hose and you let go of that hose, that thing is going to be flailing around with that big old heavy brass end on it, and it's going to do some damage. So they told us don't mess with them. If you can't put it out with a fire extinguisher, to get out. And those are old buildings, and we had sprinkler systems in them though, and they worked. We had a couple of fires in there, and sprinkler systems did a good job. Fire department came in, and so we had 3 fires. We were running some cotton material for filtration products, and didn't know what we were doing with cotton because we were polyester fiber. And we had 3 fires, and none of them was there any significant damage to our equipment or the building, and nobody got hurt. So none of the fires were all that bad, but and that's more than likely because of the sprinkler system. 159, this section applies to all automatic sprinkler systems installed to meet a particular OSHA standard. So this isn't just the particular OSHA, the sprinkler systems in your house. This is one that's installed to meet a particular OSHA standard. And then they also say compliance with the NFPA or UL will be acceptable as compliance with this section. So if UL has what tested the system, then it's good enough for this 159. And that makes a lot of sense. Exemptions: automatic sprinkler systems installed in workplaces but not required by OSHA are exempt from the requirements of this section. So that's basically your automatic sprinkler systems like we have at Carl Albert or other buildings that cover the whole building. They're not required by OSHA to have those. So they're exempt from this section. So this section just for sprinkler systems that are required by OSHA. And there are a lot more details in this. And again, I'm not going to cover all those details, but you need to know they're here. 160 applies to all fixed extinguishing systems installed to meet a particular OSHA standard, again, except for automatic sprinkler systems, which we just talked about in 159. So there you go, to meet a particular OSHA standard. 161 applies to all fixed extinguishing systems using dry chemicals. 162 applies to all fixed extinguishing systems using gas as the extinguishing agent installed to meet a particular OSHA standard. And I'm sure the gas isn't gasoline. It wouldn't be a very good extinguishing agent, would it? So I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know what gas would be they would use here. Applies, I guess CO2, applies to all fixed extinguishing systems using water or foam solution as the extinguishing agent. And again, it doesn't apply to sprinkler systems covered under 1910.159. 164 applies to all automatic fire detection systems installed to meet the requirements of a particular OSHA standard. And since this standard is referenced in 1910.38 emergency action plans, we're going to cover that in the next video along with 3839. So that's the end of subpart L, with the exception of 1910.165, which we're going to cover in the next video. And there's a lot going on in these. You need to look at them. You have to make a decision about if you need a fire brigade or want a fire brigade. I never did. We usually train people we usually train supervisors in use of fire extinguishers because they tended to be there longer period of time, etc. So, but there you have it on subpart L of the OSHA standard. And that's it. Be safe.